In a chapter that focuses, or rather a learning unit that focuses upon issues related to community organization, organizational change, those kinds of things, I think it's really useful to step ahead a chapter or two in the Levine text and to talk about her take on the key elements to working with people in groups. Now, Levine takes a look at this from a number of different angles, and first of all, we're going to talk a little bit about her definition of groups, and then we're also going to talk about the different kind of groups that workers find themselves in and some of the implications of each of those types of groups. So this is a helpful chapter. I want to tell you, though, that this in no way can really prepare you for group work, just this chapter or these chapters in and of themselves, because group work is a very complicated process, and it's something that really does require a certain amount of skill. Well, not a certain amount of skill, it requires skill in pulling off effectively. And so when you get an opportunity during the course of your social work education to learn about group dynamics and about group treatment techniques and group efforts, I encourage you very, very strongly to study that and study it closely, because it's something that you'll make use of throughout your career. Now, we have to know the dynamics of group work, and this is one of the reasons why it's very important to be able to understand these things and to study it further, because the work with our clients, or whether we're working with communities and groups within the communities, or we're working with other professionals, these efforts oftentimes occur within a group setting. For the purposes of this particular chapter, Levine defines a group as a system of relationships between and among people that involves interaction, common goals, values and norms, social structure, and some measure of cohesion and cooperation among its members. Now, she defines two different types of groups here, and there's lots of different ways of seeing groups and understanding them. But again, in this particular chapter, she looks at them as being natural. These are ones that kind of develop just in the natural course of things, or ones that are formed deliberately in order and consciously in order to pursue work on some particular interest or goal. All groups, regardless of what kind it is, have certain characteristics. This include a common purpose that dictate the size, structure, lifespan, the goals that it achieves, and so on. Even natural groups have a common purpose. The tasks that groups do develop are focused upon goals or on keeping the group going itself. Interaction occurs between group members, so it isn't something where individuals don't connect with others, because in a group you definitely do. And every relationship has its own qualities about it. Members have different positions in a group, different statuses in the group. They may have, well, they do have roles, whether they're assigned or just kind of naturally occurring roles. Every group has a set of values and norms, and as I'll mention a little bit later, this requires you really to kind of give up a little bit of your individuality, the things that you would normally do by yourself in order to be in a group, or things you would certainly decide by yourself in order to be in a group. Sometimes you have to give some of that up to the larger group. And like any system, if you remember back from our discussion about systems a few weeks ago, any system that has a sort of a stasis or a status quo, and there is a force to kind of keep things as they are, and there is another competing force about change, and that change is the thing that keeps the group lively, alive, and going forward. And so it's important, but there's always this kind of tension between keeping things as they are and between change and growth. In natural groups, these are the naturally occurring kinds of groups. She breaks them into two different kinds, and the primary group, the most important group she sees, is the family, of course, and this has a purpose of nurturing the young in a society, meeting the survival needs, that is food, shelter, clothing, those kinds of things, educating and socializing its members. The purpose here is really to kind of turn out a product, if you will, that will be able to function successfully in society and to contribute to society as a whole. The relationships tend to be intimate in nature. That is, there's not a lot kept hidden among family members. They tend to be very emotional in nature. They tend to be very intense, those relationships, because people are essentially living together and heavily invested in each other, even if they're not living together. And it has a structure of authority in order to function successfully. In most societies, that is a parent or parents who kind of supply the direction and to make the final decision, so to speak. At least in what we would consider to be a functional family in Western society. Unlike most groups we participate in, this group is a lifetime group. It's not time limited. And it has members in all different kinds of stages of development as well. Now, Levine believes, and I certainly concur, and I think most people do, that the family is the single most important group in any society, in anyone's life for that matter, and it has the most lasting influence on one's personality development. And so this is a key group, and it's something that when you work with individuals, you understand their involvement in this family. Well, you have to know about how that goes. So we'll talk about that in a moment. Reference groups, really, an individual chooses to belong in a reference group. I think Levine points out, you're born into a family. You don't have a choice of what family you're born into, but you can pick your friends. And so sometimes reference groups are a little more fun for the individual. And generally, we join these reference groups because of certain affinities, certain things we have in common, things that we share an interest in or have had experiences together in. So again, this is a group of choice rather than relationship. Reference groups, these are things that are important to us. We're not just talking about little clubs we might be involved in, but these are things like our peer groups and groups that we join because we believe in their causes and things. So this really ranks second only in importance to the family. It will exert a lot of influence over the individual, and again, this is a point where I think sometimes the individual has to give up certain choices, perhaps certain values or goals in life in order to be a member of these reference groups. So we have to understand the importance of these groups, these natural groups in particular, in our clients' lives, because you can't change a person and return them to a group that's unchanged. Because as we talked about during our discussion on systems, as one individual changes within a system, then other components or parts of that system must also change. I think we talked about sort of that dance between members, and so as one person changes their steps, other people have to change their steps as well, or we step on each other's toes. And so we have to understand how important these groups, this family group and these reference groups, are for the client, and sometimes must work with those groups as well to prepare them for the changes that are coming down the pike, so to speak. Because these relationships are very, very potent and can either facilitate or undermine all the work that you've done. Now, when you enter these groups, if you have to kind of find your own way of relating to these groups and sort of have a unique role, so to speak, and you're analyzing the relationships among the members, so to speak, as you do this. But while you're not a full-fledged member, let's say, of a particular reference group or family member, of course, nonetheless, you become a part of that group for the period of time that you're working with the client or clients. Aside from natural groups, there are formed groups, and these occur when we bring individuals together into a group, and this is not an easy process a lot of times. And one of the things that Levine stresses that I think is important is that any formed group needs to have a balance of similarities and differences, that is, homogeneity and heterogeneity. The similarities allow the group to kind of connect with each other, the members of the group, to see that they have things in common, but the differences, the heterogeneity, actually brings some liveliness to the group and brings us a vitality to the group and helps it becomes something that's a very therapeutic and healing part of the group as well, as we'll see in a few moments. But again, the similarities are the things that gives them an opportunity to create a common bond, while the differences in a group sometimes allow members to use their strengths in different ways. Group formation is usually planned on the basis of established needs and with input from the members. In the early phases of a group, I think it's very important. In most all cases, there are some exceptions to this, but in most settings where the group members are involved in setting kind of the pace of the group, the rules for the group, those kinds of things, so that they know what to expect in the future and they have a hand in a sort of a commitment into the way the group operates. the first meeting is very vital because this is the time when people that are coming into the group make the decision about whether they're going to come back or not, whether they can feel comfortable with other people in the group and feel safe there, those kinds of things. And in the second meeting, when they begin to really start working on the tasks, or start turning their attention to the tasks at hand and applying themselves, once again they have to make the decision that they're willing to commit to doing that and sticking with it for a while. And so the first few meetings really are pretty important in the formation of the group. And there is in the text a guide for the formation of groups in this particular chapter that I think is very useful and something I'd encourage you to review if you're working with groups. It's something to kind of help you get an idea how to get started with the group. And I'm not going to go into the specifics of that here. Now, as for our role in the group, it's a little different than we may be used to, because instead of being the change agent, so to speak, the group here is the change agent in these situations. It isn't so much the worker. And so now there are some groups where the worker is the leader in the group, and you'll run into a number of those kinds of things, perhaps educational groups, for instance, or things like that, where you're the person with the information and sort of the control of the group and where it goes. But in other kinds of groups, oftentimes the worker carries another role in the group, and there's 4 different ideas here, teacher, therapist, enabler. That is somebody who facilitates the group movement, so to speak, and facilitates the group getting accomplished what it wants to do, but not making the decisions himself or herself. And a role model. I mean, there's a number of different kinds of roles that a worker can take on in a group, and can be a mixture of those roles or whatever. But again, keep in mind that while the worker is a very vital part of the group, the worker is also a bit removed from the group, generally speaking, and the group is the agent of change here. And so one of the things the worker has to look at, whether they're the leader or they're kind of the enabler or whatever, are things about what's going on in the group. Use their workers' skills and knowledge to help the group accomplish its goals. And is the way the group's relating something that's going to help accomplish those goals, or is the group moving into some sort of destructive path? Is the group, for each individual, is it a positive experience, or are there negative things going on? Are there members of the group that are interfering in the group process in one way or another? Those kinds of things. And so the worker has to kind of keep track of those things and to work with the members of the group and the group itself to really develop the most positive experience for everyone possible. Now, another kind of group, and this is a formed group as well, that the worker is going to find themselves in is different from what we were just talking about, because this is the interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary team. And in this particular setting, generally speaking, the worker is one of the members of the group. This is a group of professionals that come together to provide services for a client and bring about the most effective intervention for the client. In this society, which is more and more complex, and there's more and more knowledge out there about how to approach different problems, we have a tendency to have specializations to develop, where people become particularly skilled and knowledgeable in one or two areas, so to speak, and so rather than kind of approaching things from a generalist angle, they approach it from a specialist angle. And so, for instance, a case manager, somebody who is a primary contact for the client, rather than necessarily providing all these services himself or herself, the client may be coordinating and brokering these services from available specialists. And when there are a number of people, different settings, working with a client, this is a good thing to have occasional meetings, and this is where the interdisciplinary team comes in. This could involve medical people, it can involve educational personnel, therapeutic people, it can be corrections individuals, child protection people, it can be mental health individuals. All these kinds of specialties may be offered to a particular client that we have, and it's useful to bring these people together to be sure that their efforts are coordinated and not running at cross purposes. And so this is sort of responsive to the idea about holistic interventions for clients, really looking at the entire client experience. Now, this isn't always appropriate. I mean, if a client comes into you and wants to be certified for public assistance, it may, it's probably not going to be a situation where you're going to form a multidisciplinary team and have mental health coming in and corrections coming in and educational people coming in. I mean, it's possible you would do this, but sometimes the reason you're involved with the client's very clearly defined, and so you're not going to have a big team working around a client in every situation, but in some situations where you have, multi-problem clients or whatever, this is where this is oftentimes the case. I've also seen multidisciplinary teams form around very complex problems, such as the issue of sexual abuse and sexual abuse of young children, for instance, and sexual assault, where you have either sexual assault response teams or you have child advocacy centers develop, and the legal and medical and social service and child protection and corrections. Everybody gets together and meets and discusses clients together so that they're sure that they're working as a team. So there's a number of different reasons, different ways that these multidisciplinary teams may develop. But there generally tends to be a purpose, a task that motivates this team. And because there's a lot of differences of opinions, different perspectives, different areas of expertise sometimes, it can be a difficult process. And so one of the things that these groups have to develop is a respect for these differences in perspective and differences of opinion if the team is going to function professionally, and to give everybody their own level of credibility, so to speak. And for the worker participating in the team, it's useful to understand the dynamics of that particular team, and also to be able to be effectively engaged in representing his or her own specialization or role in the team. It is a dynamic social system, and like any system, this has a tendency to move towards maturity. That tension between stasis and change is constantly going on. And if some change doesn't come in, if new things aren't introduced, new information doesn't come in, eventually the team sort of dissolves because there's really no more purpose. If the goal is achieved and nobody has anything new to contribute to the process. But really during the operation phase, which is 2 or 3 steps down in this process, the group should have a very clear definition by that time of what its purpose is. It should have a common language, clear roles, good leadership structure, an ability always to evaluate its own works, and flexibility that will permit the growth that kind of keeps it from dissolving, so to speak. Some elements of human services teams in the last couple of slides that are worth looking at here. The glue that holds the team together is its purpose, and so this should be clearly defined and agreed upon by all its members. This is generally something that is done almost before the team forms, but if it hasn't been decided, this is one of the things. I think one of the first tasks of the group is to determine its purpose, what it's there to accomplish, so to speak. The climate. One thing about the climate of a team is, in some teams you may participate in, everybody stays quiet, and it's because nobody wants to step on anybody's toes. And the sooner that it can be understood that a certain level of conflict, and I certainly don't mean wrestling matches here, but I'm talking about, disagreements, professional disagreements, a certain amount of that is normal and really is something that helps the team to function better, and so the climate in the group should permit freedom of expression, should encourage the development of compromise. And another thing is the group should know how decisions are made. Is this something where there is an individual who in this group holds more power than any other members, and thus is the person who's the ultimate authority? And some multidisciplinary teams do function that way. For instance, in hospital settings, sometimes the doctors are the ones with the final say, and all the other team members provide input, but essentially to that doctor, who then takes all that information and decides which way it's going to go. Sometimes I've seen in child protection, for instance, where teams get together to make decisions on behalf of children, but there are certain areas, let's say, for instance, that remains the realm of the child protection worker, for instance, decisions about whether or not a child needs to be removed, because that's the person that goes to court and has to make the case. So there may be areas where the team can't decide certain things, and others that they can, so these are all kinds of things that need to be kind of clear from the beginning. I think it should be decided how decisions are made. Is it by an authority? Is it a majority or minority ruled decision? Does it require consensus? That is, that if everybody doesn't necessarily agree with the final decision, they all commit to making it work. Does it have to be unanimous consent? Those kinds of things. So this is another thing that I think helps the team climate and helps it to work towards a successful resolution of any conflict that does come up. The bigger the team, the more authority is going to be necessary with leadership, so that in some respects it can become somewhat dictatorial when you get a really large team. And so sometimes it's good to keep your teams relatively small, again depending upon the purpose of the team, but you get more participation from members in smaller teams. Communication should be open and honest. If you want to avoid coalitions and some of those destructive kinds of side groups that develop, with covert agendas that can undermine the whole group process, you really want to keep everything above board as much as possible, and make sure that people know there's no fear of retaliation in the group for speaking up. There should be agreement as to role requirements and the boundaries of that role. What does the specialist contribute, and what say does the specialist have? What does the generalist do there? Sometimes, as a generalist social worker, you may be the person that's basically chairing the group. You may be the client's contact with the group if the client doesn't participate in the group himself or herself, which is something that is often encouraged these days. But if they're not there, you may be the client's representative in this group, and you may also be the group's representative to the client. And so you really need to understand what all the specialties are doing, and what while you don't have all those specific specialist skills, perhaps you need to be able to understand enough that you can communicate what's going on to the client and to other systems, say in the community, that might have an interest in what's happening here. In a group, when hierarchy and status aren't stressed too heavily, like I was talking about a little while ago, while the doctor is, or the child protection worker, holds certain areas that are inviolable, the less you have that in a group, the more I think the group's going to function better, or at least if those roles are there, that they're not, people aren't swinging their weight around too much in that group. The more democratic the group, when expectations are clear and flexibility that can accommodate for individual needs, the better the group is going to function in the end. One of the suggestions that the author has is for a group to use the basic problem-solving process in working through its issues, and that's just one model that the group might choose to use, but it is a good model that fits into this process well. And I think there's a diagram in the text, in other words, of how the basic problem-solving process can fit into a human services interdisciplinary team. But there should be clarity about what's happening in the team at all times, and between the team and its environment, so that if there are forces at play outside the human services team that are impacting the decisions of the team, that information has to be brought into the team as well. So again, oftentimes as the broker of many services for a client, you may be the person that carries this information back and forth as a generalist. And again, it can't be stressed that the team needs to be able to evaluate itself throughout the process. It should always be able to be clear enough about its purpose, its structure, those kinds of things, to be able to communicate that to other people as well. The more a team knows why it's there and what it's intended to accomplish, I believe you're going to find the more positive the experience on a human services team. Get used to the concept of interdisciplinary teams, because in the course of my career, I think there's always been a desire for teamwork, but more and more and more interdisciplinary teams is how social work gets done in so many different kinds of settings, because there are just so many areas of specialty now that no one person really has all the keys to change and success, and it's a good thing. Well, on the one hand, an individual's decision making, let's say, the kinds of things you might do for your client are more complicated because a lot of things have to run past the team. By the same token, some of the pressure is taken off the individual worker, because you don't have to be the ultimate authority and the answer for everything. You can share some of those responsibilities and those burdens with other professionals as well. And so interdisciplinary teams, I believe, is the way you're going to see a lot of your work being done in the years ahead. So it's good to be very well versed on group dynamics. Again, I would tell you, It's really useful and worth your while to learn more about group dynamics during the course of your education, because there are difficulties in group work, but there's also a lot of value to be derived from making use of groups in the course of your work with clients. And so that pretty well ties things up here for this chapter. One last thing I just wanted to mention to you. I have from time to time, I know I have a tendency to pause and do the ums, and occasionally, my sinuses make some funny sounds and everything in the course of these lectures. And switching over to this technology, in the Mac, I don't find the editing tools in this particular recording program that I had in the Windows version, and so I'm not able to go back and edit out a lot of things right now. I'm still learning how to use this, so I just want to give you my apologies if there's more than the usual kind of errant sounds, and I hope you forgive me for that. Okay, thanks very much, and we'll talk again next week.